Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and I've been playing around with a little bit of Mega Man 9, and after spending a little more time with it than I typically would with a Mega Man game, as you might know from my X5 video, I feel like I just need to make a video on this game. I'm basically just gonna go over a couple of points and explain why I believe that Mega Man 9 is a near flawless blend of modern and retro design. Well, modern for 2008, but still. Before we get into the gameplay, I want to bring up the Robot Master designs for a second. In terms of both their visual design and theming, I feel like the Robot Masters have a very strong blend of modern and old school sensibility. They're still pretty over the top and a little bit cliched with, like, you know, you got the fire guy, you got the electricity guy, but there's a certain sleekness to some of the designs, you know, like a clean factor, like for example with Tornado Man or Hornet Man, Magma Man. They're cartoony, but there's still a level of groundedness in the way that they're drawn. I really enjoy that about them. And of course, it's pretty neat that we got Splash Woman, if only just for the variety of it. I think my favorite Robot Masters though are Jewel Man and Galaxy Man, just because of how out there their character designs are, especially Galaxy Man with that UFO motif going on. And after the Robot Masters, it's only appropriate that I talk about their corresponding weapons. I don't think it'd be controversial for me to say that Mega Man 9 has one of the strongest weapon lineups of any Mega Man game, period. But I almost feel like the weapons don't get enough credit, because it's not just that they're useful, it's that they're balanced and they aid the gameplay as a whole. Sure, we may all love the Metal Blade, for example, or the Elect Beam, but the problem there is, yes, they're really fun to use, but they kind of break the game. On the other hand, you also don't want the weapons to be far too situational and only useful against their corresponding weakness. And this is where Mega Man 9 excels. Every weapon is useful, both situationally and overall practically, you know, just in general combat situations, like how the Hornet Chaser can be used to retrieve items and just attack enemies that are out of reach, or how the Jewel Satellite is just amazing in every single way. I love that weapon so much. But the best part is the fact that none of the weapons outright replace the Buster. There's always some sort of caveat, some sort of trade-off that you have to make when using one of the special weapons, you know, aside from just the fact that they have limited ammo. I guess the closest one that would come to replacing the Mega Buster would be the Laser Trident because of its precision and shield-piercing properties, but I think its rate of fire is just a little bit slower, so there's still a trade-off. And tying the weapons back to the Robot Master fights themselves, I really can't forget to mention that the fights are still challenging even when you have their weakness for the most part. I understand that the weaknesses are most effective in games like 7, you know, the ones where the boss pattern resets, and this isn't so much of an issue in the classic series, but truthfully, some of the damage outputs on the bosses are pretty high, so you're gonna have to try and actually fight them, even if it won't take as long compared to a Buster only run. So even though you'll see me totally decimate Splash Woman here, Concrete Man actually took me a couple of attempts to get him down even with his weakness. And don't even ask me how many times I had to refight Hornet Man to get that take. Moving on to the stage design itself, this is what prompted this video to begin with. Let me just get this out of the way. Mega Man 9 is not completely free of what you would call old school bullshit. There's definitely some moments that will catch you off guard on your first playthrough. The first thing that comes to mind would be Concrete Man stage with those little dudes that pop out from under the screen, or even certain sections that you're gonna see right here in Splash Woman stage with the spikes and the moving platforms filled with water. I'm not gonna lie, I died a fair few times while even recording this very stage, but I never really got too frustrated because it was genuinely my fault. You're given all the time in the world to observe the pattern of, let's say, the moving platforms you're gonna see later, and most new mechanics, as in any good game, are introduced in a safe environment initially. Plus, when it comes to Concrete Man, those little guys popping out from the bottom of the screen don't move that quickly. You could totally see them coming and jump out of the way. Honestly, I feel like this is something that not enough people talk about when it comes to Mega Man, especially considering that he originated in the 80s. So you gotta remember, back then, almost every platformer had some sort of time limit, which obviously incentivized the player to move quickly, to move forward. But Mega Man didn't do this. There is not a single Mega Man game where you have time limits for the stages other than like very specific set pieces or something. So whenever the player rushes and makes a mistake, really, who's to blame other than themselves? There's no reason for you not to just stop, look at what's going on around you, and plan accordingly. That doesn't mean that the challenges ahead aren't difficult, but I would never call them unfair. Jewel Man stage also has a bunch of these swinging platforms, which apparently give a lot of people trouble. And yeah, my first time playing them, it took me a while to get the physics of them down, but after I got used to the inertia, it was actually a very fun little platforming challenge to overcome. If I recall correctly, I think the only truly dickish sort of jump in this game would be in one of the Wily stages, I believe, where you have this damn near pixel perfect jump, but you know, that's super late game and it's only one instance, so I'm not going to get too upset over it. Considering that I get the most replay value out of Mega Man's games via the Robot Master stages, I couldn't really let that single jump take points away from my overall opinion of the game. But yeah, aside from that though, the level design is very solid overall, challenging, fair, and enjoyable. It's the kind of game where you can tell that the developers took the 20 or so years worth of progress that had been made in platforming as a whole and applied it to something that, you know, harkens back to those old days, but is still, in my opinion, distinctly modern in the way that it feels to play. And speaking of harkening back, yeah, I was gonna have to talk about this, the removal of the slide and charge shot. I gotta admit, I did like those abilities when they were introduced initially. They added a little bit of extra creativity to what the levels could do, and it made Mega Man's moveset just a little more versatile. It also brought him just that slight bit closer to Mega Man X, and you know, I really like Mega Man X. But I can't deny though, there's a certain methodical charm to tackling Mega Man stages without being able to slide or charge your buster. And when it comes to the slide especially, not having it sort of forces you to think of the act of avoiding enemies in a slightly different way than you used to. If anything, removing those abilities was a sign of confidence on the developer's part, as in they know that they're able to make compelling level design even with fewer abilities. Because you know that when you have a very robust moveset, even mediocre level design can be pretty fun. I mean, it's the same reason why I kinda still don't hate Mega Man X6, because it still has that really fun movement underneath all of the design. Although another later addition in the Mega Man series that the developers didn't cut was the shop, and now with the higher overall game difficulty, I feel like it's a lot more justified than it used to be. I think that reintroducing and updating the shop was an incredibly smart decision in making this game more accessible, and since unless you grind in Plugman stage, bolts aren't just given away, so a skilled player won't be able to simply exploit that to make the game way too easy for themselves, but a less skilled player will be able to spend that time and get some more bolts and make the game more doable. Now, if I were to update, modernize the game just a little bit more, I maybe would have made the enemies drop more bolts depending on how many times you've died in the stage, just to really make sure that a less skilled player is still able to experience most of the game. But still, even as is, it's a very helpful addition. I didn't use it personally, but I was definitely tempted at times to buy like the half damage thing, for example. Lastly, I'm going to spend the final few minutes of this video talking about the presentation. It's clear as day that with Mega Man 9's return to 8-bit, the designers were definitely going for some older visual sensibility, aside from the Robot Master designs, which I talked about earlier. But I think a really good way to describe this game's visuals and sound as well would be authentic but not archaic. Now, I'm not super familiar with the technical specs of the NES, but I'm not sure if 100% of this game could have been pulled off visually on the NES. There's just a certain richness to the colors which might not have been possible back then. Although, if you have some experience, make sure to correct me. But it's not even so much about the technical aspect of it, but just the choices of colors, shapes, overall design, language that feels just more tasteful, I guess, compared to a game from the 80s and 90s. That's not to say that the original Mega Man games on NES didn't look good. No, they were some of the best looking games on the system. But there's just a certain pop to Mega Man 9's visuals that I just can't really put my finger on. In fact, while I don't think it's the better game on the whole, Mega Man 10 actually goes even further with this. It's a really rich looking game. What's interesting is that the developers maybe feared that people wouldn't have considered the visuals old school enough, so they allow you to enable sprite flickering. Personally, I see that as kind of missing the point, because at least I thought that the whole idea, the inception of Mega Man 9 was taking those old visual sensibilities and updating them and removing some of the limitations from back then. So enabling sprite flickering, unless you were super nostalgic for it, I really wouldn't understand why you do it. And as a Mega Man game, obviously 9 has an absolutely banger soundtrack, but seriously, the quality of the compositions is insanely good. Mega Man music has always been very strong, but certain games wouldn't necessarily have the most memorable soundtracks. I can tell you right now, I remember maybe 3 tracks from Mega Man 4 and 1 track from Mega Man 5. I don't think I remember any of Mega Man 6, although Mega Man 7 and 8 Yeah, those are great. Although those two had a very different sound and a much more poppy and also jazzy direction, no doubt to take advantage of all the new technology that was being introduced. But with Mega Man 9 and the return to chiptune, the songwriting once again has a much more hard rock and even at times metal sort of mentality. And that simplification has made some of the most memorable tunes in the whole series, with my absolute favorites being Jewel Man and Wily 2. So to wrap up my thoughts on Mega Man 9, I do think it's a genuinely great blend of that old school and modern. It's an update within a throwback that doesn't just exist for its own sake. You may not have any prior experience with the classics and still enjoy this game, I believe. And with that, it's time to end another episode of Vivid Noise. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.